In this video, we'll import the assets we're going to work with and set up the initial HDA. So the first thing we want to make sure is we're in the object context up here, and then put down a geometry node. And this is going to house all of our work. So I'm just going to name this. And now let's put down a file node, and this will just let us import a file from disk. And if you've downloaded the fence asset, it's this one here, the LOD0 I'm going to use. I'm not going to worry about using the different LODs in Houdini. Otherwise, import both of these with two file nodes. So if we look at this, we can see it's actually connected as one piece. So the next thing we need to do is split these apart. We can use a split node, and the split node, if you double click on it, is actually just two blast nodes, which are nodes that delete things, set to opposite inputs. So if we just come in here and double click this, hit enter, and if we invert the selection, we can see we've got both sections split out. So I'm going to leave invert selection on. If you drag and select a bunch of nodes and hold A, you can swipe to a line. I am a little bit pedantic about my node layouts and like to keep them very tidy, so you'll probably see me doing that constantly throughout this tutorial. The next thing I'm going to do is put down a transform node, because you might notice that these are huge. If you middle mouse click on here, you can see the size. They're about 300 units long, which is the equivalent of 300 meters, the scale we're working at. So let's put down a transform, and in here put 0.01 to bring it down to a meter scale. You can also hit Shift S to change this node line style. I prefer this one slightly, but that's just personal preference. Hold Alt and click and drag to copy this transform node and plug it into the out input. Now we have both of our posts. Cool. Now we're going to put down a subnet, and this is going to be the start of our HDA or Houdini digital asset, and this is going to be basically the tool we make and bring into Unreal Engine. So I'm going to plug these into these first two inputs. Select this and right click and go create digital asset. Browse to where we want it. I'm going to make sure it's in our project and go to the HDA folder. Call this proc fence. Give it a name, and then the label is basically the display label. And hit accept on that. And it will bring up this dialog box here, and this lets us choose some options about our HDA. So a couple of things we want to change, probably only one actually, is we want to leave maximum inputs as 1, because we want it to output something always, and we're not going to need to output more than one thing. Maximum inputs is 2, that's good, because we're just going to have one for our fence section and the post. But we don't need a minimum number of inputs, because eventually we're going to make this so it doesn't use modular pieces. So we want it to be able to work without having to have stuff plugged into it. And if we hit accept on that, just delete that to rename it. And jump on in, and it'll have these two inputs. So these are basically what's plugged in here and here. And it will have an output node by default. I'm just going to hold Y to cut that. And with that done, we'll get started. Actually, one more thing before I I'm going to put down 2 nulls here. Nulls are just empty nodes, and the reason I'm going to put them here is because we might want to like point to these with other nodes, and it's just a general nice sort of housekeeping thing to keep track of what these are. So I like to put them in. So this is going to be our end fence section. Hold Alt, click and drag, and copy that. And this is going to be in post section. And I'm going to drag a box over both of them, hit C on the keyboard, and I'm just going to color them blue, just to distinguish them from other nodes. This is just a color scheme I like to use, so I typically use blue for nodes that are like nulls that are bringing something in, and occasionally I'll use them for at the end of this sort of section of nodes, and then I'll color them green and label them out. And so the reason we do something like this is when we come in and put in a lot of nodes in here, you can point to this one or this one, and it doesn't matter what you do in between here, it will always sort of stay consistently pointing to the right node when you're referencing it with other nodes. And capitals because it means it will appear at the top of lists. So we do delete that because we don't need it yet. So we'll stop in this video, and in the next video we'll start setting up our control curve and copy to points to sort of set up our initial fence.